My name is Daniel Lezcano. I'm working for Linaro in the power management team. I'm working in Linaro since 5 years now, a bit more. And before I was working for IBM. I was assigned from IBM in Linaro. And I was working in the Linux Technology Center. So maybe, as you know, IBM is a big actor in the making Linux better and contributing and making the Linux kernel at the level it is today. So I've been involved in the open source in general since more or less 13 years. And today I will try to explain what is the open source philosophy. Why is that important to understand the open source philosophy? It's important to understand because we have to change our mindset when we want to send changes, when we want to upstream code, we want to contribute to open source project, we have to change the mindset. And in order to change the mindset, we have to understand where is coming the open source and what is the philosophy behind this principle. So usually there is a confusion between the open source and the free software. Free software is, we will explain later what is it, but free software is not open source. These are two different things. The open source project is a development process, while the free software is a social movement, is an ideology. And it's very important to understand the difference because at one moment both will join together in order they will join and we will get a community. So we have to understand the difference. So at the beginning, in the 60s, we had a lot of different computers, and when you were asking for the operating system source code, you can ask that. You were able to ask for this at the computer vendor, and they give you the source code of the operating system. So you were able to change the operating system, or at least understand how it works. After that, in the 70s, these source code were more restricted, and it was more difficult to share this information about these computers because the operating system fall under contract law model. In the 80s, the source code was even more restricted to the client. So usually the client were teachers, academics, university, and they were used to have the source code of the operating system hack around for sometimes change the operating system to fit their needs. So at this point, because of this constraint about closing the source code and restricting the source code for the operating system, raised the free software project called GNU. Usually when we are talking about Linux, it's not Linux, but it's GNU and Linux. Linux is the kernel and GNU is the entire free software project. And in 1985, the Free Software Foundation was created. So the free software project, GNU, is to create a free operating system with source code available. And that's the response, the answer of the source code being restricted by vendors. In the 90s, most of the software, most of the operating system, all the tools were ready, but one thing was missing. It was the kernel. And in 91, the Linux kernel project started. In the meantime, in 98, we had the creation of the open source initiative. I will explain that right after. So we see that in the 90s, we have an entire operating system, the GNU Linux, with open source and free for everyone. And little by little, the GNU Linux was widely used everywhere, and it raised interest from the industry. So today, I think these numbers are now out to date, because they are probably bigger than that. But we see that for desktop and laptop, the market share is very small, but for mobile and tablet, it's 63%, thanks to the Android system. Then we have server, mainframe, supercomputer, embedded system. We see that all this, it was zero at the end of the 90s. It was zero, and now it's almost taking half of the market share. But we have there a split. We have the Free Software Foundation in one side, on the other side, we have the industry goals. The Free Software Foundation wants free software, open source, and industry wants closed source, and of course not free software. So in 98, the creation of the open source initiative appeared in order to fill the gap between the free software one side and the industry on the other side. The idea of the open source initiative is to promote the open source. So it's something in the middle. So it promotes open source in the industry. It's based on business cases. Also, because we have free software, we have a lot of licenses. So we have application, people saying, this is my open source license. So it's creating a license, my license. Another one is creating its own license. So you have a plethora of licenses. So the OSI helps to unify all these licenses into a few ones. So in order to have an open source software being open source with the open source label, it must fulfill 10 criteria. And then you provide your license. This license must fulfill these 10 criteria, and it's approved by the OSI. And then your project is open source project. So these are the 10 criteria. So very quickly it's for the record, but you have to allow free redistribution of the source code. You have to provide the source code. There is also a definition of what is the derived work. Means when you take a project from someone else and you create your own project based on this one, what happens to your project? So that must be defined in the license. You can't change the source code, the initial source code, saying that it's my code. You have to keep the integrity. You can change, make it to evolve, but you can't make disappear the initial source code. You don't have to do discrimination against person, group, fields. You have to distribute the license, etc., etc. All these criteria are much more better explained in the website, in the open source website.
That maybe you will say it later, but what is missing with respect to just free software? I mean, what would there be more in a free software with respect to all those criteria?
Yeah, so the open source initiative is not free software.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so free software, I will explain after.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes,
So, OSI and free software. So they share the common culture. The common culture is open software and hacking the code. That's the common culture between the open source initiative and free software foundation. But the goals are different. Free is free in every terms of the, every sense of the term. Free in terms of freedom, but also free like a free beer. So it's a philosophy. So the goal is to provide free software to everyone with open source code. OSI does not have this goal. The OSI is to promote the open source in the industry, so the industry can understand the benefit of using the open source. But you have a Red Hat. Red Hat is not free, but it's open source.
But what about the first criteria then? The first one was that you have to redistribute it for free.
Free redistribution, if you take, yeah, I don't know, actually. I think it's free redistribution of the code, source code. I think you can give for free the source code of the project. You don't have to pay for that. Yeah? So, of course, because all the tools are coming from the Free Software Foundation, from the GNU project, it's the base on the open source. So, OSI helps to introduce all these tools inside the industry, and that's what happened. Now we have all the server, the data center, they are all full of Linux system. Android is Linux system. Tablet, Linux system. Embedded Linux system. We have a lot of Linux-based system. But, well, I'm talking about Linux, but we have other open source projects. But it's more easy to talk just about Linux. So roughly, there are a lot of licenses, but for Linux and GNU Linux, we can talk about two licenses. Is the GPL and the LGPL. GPL means if you have your source code is on GPL license, then if you use this source code, or if you use from for example, you include an header, automatically your project becomes GPL. So it's contaminating. You have the propagation of the GPL license on the different subsystem using GPL code each time. So it's scary, it could be scary because that means that always you have to open your source code, but the good thing is it protects the end user. The end user has the guarantee that he can access the source code of the software. Means he can see if there is no malicious code and whatever, what happens with his personal data, etc., etc. LGPL is just to prevent this propagation. If you have an application using a library, which is LGPL, your application does not become LGPL or GPL. It keeps its license. And that's the definition of the LGPL. And one library, well-known library, is the libc. The libc library is under LGPL. Otherwise, any application running on Linux will become automatically GPL. So it's, let's say, some Free Software Foundation don't like LGPL. They want GPL for everything. But OSI will promote something in the middle in order to not scare the industry with license and legal aspect. So they also define the LGPL, and the LGPL fulfill the open source criteria. The GPL, the LGPL licenses is has a lot of legal aspect. It's a big license, and it's not up to me to explain that because it's very complex. There are some implication and so on. So if you want to understand the GPL, it's up to a lawyer to explain what is the details of these licenses. So in summary, the open source in general exists since the beginning because scientists were able to access the source code of the operating system, and scientists usually programmers, and they were sharing this source code and trying to solve the problem by sharing this source code. When the licensing business model and closing sources that created a singularity, and from this singularity appeared the Free Software Foundation. And so we had a split between industry and Free Software Foundation, and in the middle appeared the OSI, allowing to do the bridge between both. So the open source and free software coexist together. So it's a different thing. Don't forget that free software is a philosophy and open source is a development process. So of course, we will find that the development process, we have the free software spirit in the open source project. That means that people we will be discussing with will be very influenced by this ideology of freedom, and they don't like corporate code, they don't like proprietary code, and so on. So that's why you have to understand this philosophy in order to have the right mindset to upstream code. So we have development process in open source. We have usually two development processes. The first development process is the cathedral, and the second one is the bazaar. The cathedral model is you have a software release with a version, and with this version you have the source code, the tarball with the source code. So you don't have any visibility with all the changes in between each version. The bazaar model, you see the development at the same time is evolving. So every time there is a commit, every time you see a change, you can see that. So you can follow and you can also participate more easily to a project when it's bazaar. There is a classical explaining what is the open source and the good open source practices. I put the link there as a reference if you want to have more information about these two. So the cathedral comes from where? It comes from the past. Because computers were very expensive. So it was for a small amount of, for a few people, very few people. And the access to the network also was very rare. So usually that was for academics, people in the university and so on. And these people were working together on the same project, privately. And each time they were delivering a new version with the tarball. That was the case, for example, with GCC. GCC was one of Cathedral project, and at the end, it was forked and switched to Bazaar mode. Because with this model, it's very hard to follow what's happening and make sure that it's going in the right direction. So if you base everything you are doing on this project, but you cannot have any eye on what is the direction of the project, then it's very, I mean, it's not necessarily a good deal, because you might end up with a wrong application at the next release. So that's why a new version, so that's the mostly used development process today, is the Bazaar mode, and we say that it's Linus Torvald put in place this development process. So the idea is, as everyone has a computer now, and everyone has access to the internet. So we can access the source code everywhere. And all this process is based on the review. And that's a very important aspect of the open source. The review allows to track, to see the changes, and before that hits a tree, most of the bugs are catched there. Imagine that in a Linux version, between two versions, 3 months, there is more or less 15,000 changes in 3 months. And most of the bugs are spotted at the review process. If you look at the amount of changes we have in 3 months and the number of bugs we have at the end, is a very small number of bugs. The ratio is very, very small. And that's thanks to the review process. That means we skip most of the testing when developing. So in the development process, what happens usually is the fork. That can happen. The fork is when you have an open source project, and then you copy this open source project and you make it to diverge. So you take another direction. So that happens usually when you have one project and the maintainer is not responsive because he's too busy or he does not care or whatever. Or because the project is not going to the right direction. You accept that most of the people contributing to this project think that the project must go to this direction, but the maintainer is the only one wanting to go to this direction. So that can lead to a fork. Another aspect is we might want to skip all the review process because it's long, and we don't want to have people giving criticism on the code. One example is the Android kernel. The Android kernel just fork the Linux kernel, and it's just skipping most of the review process. That's bad. That's not necessarily a good thing, because all the people we lose all the community of the Linux development in the Linux development cycle. So the review process is worse than the Linux kernel. So that's a fork is bad when it's done for bad reasons. But on the other, there are other situations where forking is good. It's good when the project is almost dead. So we want to make it create a new dynamic. So we fork the project. That happened, for example, with X11 and Xorg. We had a fork there. And now we have Xorg. Xorg is evolving on Linux desktop much more quickly than X11. And X11 is now just not existing anymore. Another term is the community. the community is very important. It's very important to understand the community. The community is a group of persons working on the same project. So, all people in the community have the same goal. The goal is to make the project better, nicer, faster. That's the goal of the community. Ensure the perennity of the project. Usually we have a community is formed by hobbyist people, people freelance, people from education, or we have also people from the industry, and all these people form the community. So of course, when we are doing changing inside an open source project, we have the community, and it's the community who has the voice. It's not the individual. So if an individual wants to make a change, he has to convince the community to change his words and reach a consensus. The community is not there to say no to every change, proposed change. If the change makes sense, usually if you are part of the community, then discussing, commenting, and reaching a consensus brings you to a merge of your change. So you have to collaborate with the community. You are part of the community, and you have to collaborate with all the people in the community. That's why the collaboration is the cornerstone of the open source. This collaboration relies on tools, open source tools. We have development tools like Git, compilers, Gmake, GCC, GDB. Communication is usually through emails and mailing list, RC. Sometimes pastebin, when we have a huge amount of information we want to share with someone, we give a link, put that on pastebin. Or we have also Bugzilla, is the place where we put bugs when we find a problem on a project. The contribution, so that's an important term. Everything, any kind of help which is beneficial for the open source project is called a contribution. That could be you answer a question, someone is asking a question about the project. You answer the question, is a contribution. You see an error, you see an error in the code. You send a patch to fix this error. It's a contribution. You see a patch from someone else. You take the patch. You test it. It's a contribution. Everything that helps the others in the community is a contribution. And it's very important to contribute, because when you contribute, you have positive karma inside the community. And the more positive karma you have, the better chances your changes. It's not correct, my sentence, but if you help a lot, you have a good karma. Good karma means people will listen what you are saying, and they will be more inclined to take your changes when you ask for a merge of a change. So in order to contribute, you need the right mindset. First of all, don't be scared. Criticism is part of the open source. You have always people doing criticism on your code. Always. It's not you, it's your code. And it's just the goal is just make your code better. That's all. So don't be scared about that, and just follow what we'll have the next presentation, 101 and 201. You have a simple tutorial with this presentation explaining step by step how to send contribution in the open source. Take some time to be more self-confident about yourself by reading documentation and training yourself. And also it's important to understand the different actors in the open source project. So who is doing what? Who are more voiced than the other? Because in the open source project you have people who are always there, always contributing, always commenting, always answering, knowing all the history of the file. And you have other people which are just coming, helping a bit, sending changes, and disappearing. So it's important to understand to who you have to send the changes, who has more voice than the other. And then, when you are prepared, you can send your patch. So you don't be offended, because when you have comments on your change, on your patch, even if it's not said in a nice way, if there is comment, that means the feature raise interest from the community. The worst thing is you send a change and nothing happens. Nobody answers. That's a very bad sign. So when you have comments, even if they are negative, even people is saying that your code is crap, it's good because the feature is interesting. That means you just need to write it in other manner. But otherwise, it's okay. So in order to not be offended, don't take the criticism on you, but on the code, and stick just on, don't troll, just stick on technical facts about your changes. You give, if you think you are right, you do testing, you give number in order to support your position. Also keep in mind that maybe the comments is coming from someone who has a good experience on the subsystem you are touching. And maybe he saw something you missed. Maybe a misdesign or an issue. Always, what is the most important thing is the project, is the open source project. You must evolve to something better. No regression for the others. So that means the code you send must be designed keeping in mind that there is other people using this project. When you send the changes, you don't have necessarily immediately answer from people in the community. Because as we saw, in the community we have people from education, or people who are hobbyists, or people from companies. Maybe they are busy at the moment you send the patches. They don't have time to review, and they will review that 2 days later. So it's okay, it's fine. So don't be asking to review the patches immediately when you send it. Please review, please review, please review. Just wait someone answer to the patch. If after a week nobody did any answer, just do a gentle reminder. And if not, that means that your patch is not interesting. Maybe you have to write it in another way. Also, it's not because you send a patch, that means it will be taken. A lot of people think that when they come to open source, they just send their changes and they will merge because they send their changes. No, there is no obligation to take the patches. No obligation. If the maintainers don't like, or the community don't like your changes, it will never enter. Don't be selfish. So when you contribute to an open source project, you have to contribute as someone being part of the community, not part of your company. You must design your changes in order to make life easier for the people of the community, and not as an individual. If you send changes saying, okay, these changes are for my company, for me, I don't care about the others, my code is the better, you have 0% chance of having this code being merged upstream. So always keep in mind that I know it's not easy, because company might ask you to merge to upstream code, and you are facing a community who don't have schedule, who don't have any obligation of taking your changes. So it's difficult to work as a community and also as an employee for your company. When you have comments, you have to take into account the comments, always. What that means? If you have criticism on your code, that's done through comments. When you have these comments, you take them into account, you do the changes or not, but always you explain why you don't take into account these comments. You might have a very good reason, but the idea is you take into account the comment of people answering to your patch in order to reach the consensus. The consensus is the key point to have your patch merged. If there is no consensus, there is no merge of your patches. Collaborate. You want to send changes, you want them to be taken into account, do the same on the other way. Take into account the changes of the different people sending patches. Test the patches, review the code, fix bug, fix warning or error. You have an integration tree, which is Linux Next. It's very easy to spot a lot of stupid warning and error with combination of configuration file. Fix that. People like this kind of fix. And then, when you are very comfortable by sending simple fixes, then send more complex changes. So there is the two next presentation, which is Upstreaming 101 and Upstreaming 201. The Upstreaming 101, we will explain what is the Linux kernel development cycle and what is the DCO, which is an important legal aspect of contributing to the Linux kernel. And then we will write very simple patches. The second part of the upstreaming tutorial is the aspect of sending the patch, the change outside to the community, and how to react to the comments, and it's an explanation again of the review process. So the important point of all this presentation is, first, the open source is a development process. The open source projects are supported by a community, and when you want to work on this open source project, you belong to this community. Usually, we have the community is aligned with the free software philosophy. That means people we want freedom with the code, we want freedom with the contribution. And finally, collaboration is the path, and then the consensus with the collaboration reach the consensus, and the consensus is the key to have your changes to be merged upstream. John Maddock, give me a hand to fix a couple of things in my presentation, especially in the timeline. So, let's say thanks to John. Do you have questions? No?
I have one.
Yeah.
When you talked about karma,
Yeah.
is this something that you have experienced personally, or somehow it's a common vision that to be listened to, you have first to gain a reputation.
Yes, it's that's something I experience myself, but that's the second point is right. So if you collaborate in a sense that you help the others, then you increase your reputation. The better is your reputation, the more chance you have the people will trust your changes. So that's the karma-based work.
This is a common belief. I mean, it is not something that you can measure, but
Yeah.
I mean, in the community.
Yeah. More question? No? Okay, thank you.